It's time to take your business to the next level, the boss level. These are the premier business owner strategies and successes being utilized by the industry's top talent today. Rock your business like a boss, a VO boss. Now let's welcome your host, Anne Ganguza.
Hey everyone, welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Anne Ganguza, and today I am excited to bring back special guest, audio engineer, musician, and all-around tech guru, Gillian Pelkonen, to the podcast.
Hello.
Yay, Gillian.
Hi. So excited to talk, Anne. I feel like it's been forever since we got on and got to chat.
I know. I am so glad to have you here today. And every time I talk with you, I experience something new that you know. And you're amazing, Gillian. If I'm just going to say that, you're amazing.
Thank you.
And I was thinking about this today. I want to talk to you because I feel like you and I are females in male-dominated fields, because before I got into voiceover and demo production, I worked as a design engineer. And then after that, I was in technology. And so I've always been working in male-dominated fields. And you, of course, being in the music industry and an audio engineer, we've probably got a few similar experiences. And I think I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you as well, because I've only been working for a couple of years. I know that you're probably been working for a while. And so obviously I'd love to talk to you because thankfully I think we have similar but different experiences, because all of the work that you've done throughout your life has made my life easier and the trickle down. And I just love talking to women, mostly because I never see women. Every time I see a woman, I'm like, oh my gosh, can I hug you? Like just men all the time, or like a woman, a non-binary person, whatever, because it really is true. There's some statistics I was reading. There's a really good article and research that was done. I don't remember who, but I'll put it in the show notes, that between producers and audio engineers, women make up 3%.
Wow.
And they group producers and audio engineers together within the music industry.
That's so small. That is crazy. And I know so many talented females.
I know.
And I just know, look, I'm going to be honest with you. When people ask me about my career trajectory, I talk about when I went to college, and I've always been interested in technical and geeky things, and I did pretty well in school, and so I was encouraged to go into engineering. And I went to college and studied mechanical engineering, and actually was like one of 3 females in the entire class that was studying engineering. And so because I grew up in a very small town, and so I thought I would always talk about my geeky interests and the fact that I was the only girl that was in woodshop or those things. I always thought, well, it's because I come from a small town. But then when I went to college and I was in a bigger population, I thought to myself, wow, I really kind of am in a smaller minority in my engineering class, because, again, there's like 3 of us. And as a matter of fact, only one ended up graduating the program. I actually transferred into another engineering program and graduated with a degree in computer graphics engineering. So when I got out of school, I got a job as a design engineer for an orthopedic company, and thus began my corporate experience of being a female in a predominantly male-oriented field. And it was tough. It was really tough because, first of all, you don't have a lot of other females to, I guess, bond with about your job. And so the few that are there, it seemed we were all very protective of your job, protective of maybe your skill set in a way, because it was either being challenged or being, I'm going to say challenged for lack of a better word, but being challenged. And so it was really hard for me to find my footing. And after that, again, without going through my entire history, I worked in technology. I got out of engineering. Being an engineer in the late 80s was tough. And I constantly say that I'm not bitter. And I really wasn't, because I was young and I was excited and I loved what I did. And I felt like the fact that I was kind of a smaller minority in the engineering group made me better at what I did, because I think I had to work harder. And we can talk about that with you. I think working hard is kind of like, I've always been used to working hard anyways, but sometimes I feel like I might have to work triple hard to get maybe the same recognition.
And you definitely did. It's like totally not unreasonable to say that you would have had to just to be taken as seriously as everybody else.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy story. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, I spent 20 years in technology, which again was another male dominated field. And so I was constantly being passed by to my male peers because they thought that they were in charge. And so again, it was just one of those things where I literally worked my tushy off. And I feel not quite as much, but I also feel like in the voiceover industry to be a demo producer, a female demo producer, there's not a lot of them out there. And again, I feel like it's something that I feel like I work very hard at. I'm very proud of being a demo producer. I love what I do. But let's talk about you. I mean, my goodness. I mean, first of all, being as young as you are and as successful as you are, but I know that you must have gone through a lot of the same experiences as I did in the music industry and in engineering.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm still going through it. And unfortunately, I mean, I hope not, but I assume I'll be going through it for the rest of my life. And really, from talking with other women of various ages, and I really do look up to a lot of other older women because they've gone through it and they can really mentor me. And I feel like no matter what age you are, I just find so much camaraderie and people who really want to mentor me and help me. But the one thing I can say about my experience is that I never feel physically unsafe, which I know was not the case for many people, which is a really scary thing to think about. And I always try to acknowledge that, like, I have these struggles and I want to talk about my experiences, but the fact that, like, I go into work and I don't feel physically unsafe is really cool. And it's an insane sentence to have to say, but I know from other people's experience, things used to be a lot more outright and a lot more pointed and really mean. And the whole point was to be like, this is our space and we don't want you here. And so we're going to try to make it difficult for you to stay here. I don't know if that was your experience, but I've heard that that's kind of like what happened.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I never had nobody said that directly. However, I mean, now we're talking another area where there were other ways to try to intimidate me as a female, which lean toward a Me Too kind of a thing where people are trying to show their power in multiple ways. And I think as a female in a male-dominated field, if you have those types of issues that happen, boy, they're tough to navigate. Because again, if a woman is seen complaining and that's the thing, I think we were taught for so long to just maybe not say anything because we would be judged as bitter as, God, we could have 100 podcast episodes on that.
I know. There's so many things.
And I think that over the years, there's really just so many different intimidation tactics that are different from male to female, or really just anybody. I don't even want to say male, female, but because it could be non-binary, it could be transgender, it could be a lot of different genders that experience the same thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I heard this amazing thing on a podcast that I listened to because, just to be concise, I'm going to just say man, woman, but I did hear this amazing thing where someone who was having a similar conversation was like, when I say woman, I mean someone who is not male, who is like within the minority. So when I'm saying it, I'm sure when we're talking about it, encompasses like transgender people, non-binary. And I know that that's not their proper gender identity, but like in the discussion of like male, which is the default of society, versus women, which could be used to talk about all those other people. So
yes. No, thank you for clarifying that.
I thought that was cool that someone said that. But my experience as a woman, that's how I'm going to talk about it, because that's how I feel about myself. But there's also whether or not like you're non-binary, if you are in a female presenting body, you do carry the weight of being treated like a woman, which I know is another thing that people who don't have that gender identity but get grouped in with women and have that female experience. It's such a complicated issue because really we're talking about how other people perceive us, not really how we perceive ourselves in any which way. Or that's what I found. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. You're right. It is about how people perceive us as opposed to how we perceive ourselves. And wow, that was just, all right, we can go home now because that was so amazing and perceptive. I love that.
I just keep making all these like blanket statements, but I'll talk about my specific experience briefly. The whole reason that I got into doing what I do now, which is for the most part audio engineering, assistant engineering, freelancing, which I do is a pretty solitary activity. So it's not like there's anything going on there. But I was working in studios as an artist. I was recording, and I was being paired with a lot of male engineers. And I actually had all of college, all the engineers I worked with, I had very positive experiences, but I was paired with one engineer who was a woman. I just connected with her so well. It was such a great working relationship. And realistically, I wanted more control and knowledge about what I was doing because I love to learn about what I'm interested in. But it was in the front of my mind that there's not a lot of women. I've been doing this for 4 years and I've been paired with all these men and only one woman, and it was my best experience. Like, what if I could do that? I feel like I can communicate with people well. All of these things that, like, I think sometimes is lacking in men, which is a complete generalization when I say it and what I was thinking, because I was 20 years old at the time. And I also thought, well, there's not that many women, so it'll be a great thing for me to try because there's not many people like me. And so I thought about that, not taking into account that when I got into this male-dominated field, I would actually have to do it and be surrounded by men all day. And I didn't think about all of the things that would come into play, like not being taken as seriously because of my gender, or all of the like microaggressions that people say. Also, like a weird thing that I still encounter and I'm still dealing with is what I've experienced is by being a woman in a male-dominated field, it's really easy to get your foot in the door. But once you're in the door, that's where like all the complication starts happening, which is crazy. And then there's this whole personal thing that I am still dealing with, which is when I'm working with other women. I mean, I love when there's another woman in the studio. It is so great. But I do have this like weird feeling of like, well, I'm only here because I'm a woman. And if there's another woman, then like my special thing is no longer special. The way I'm treated is it makes me think of myself as only my gender. And sometimes I have to step back and be like, you have to be confident that you're more than just that, even though all day I'm treated like that's all I am. So I don't know. That's my experience. Those are some things on my mind when I talk about it and how I got here. And I guess some of the things that I'm dealing with at the moment within myself.
Well, I'll tell you what you said about maybe it made getting in the door a little bit easier. I actually had that perception myself to get in the door because employers want to feel like they're treating people fairly, and so they need representation. But then you have perception once you're there, right? I always feel like, okay, I got myself here in this position. Now I have to prove that I'm worthy, right? And I feel like, okay, that's something that maybe other people, do they feel the same? Do they have to prove that they're worthy of the position? Because there is perception that, you know what, oh, she's here because she's a female. I had that at my other job where people were like, well, they want a female in tech as a good role model, right? For when I worked in the school, right? They want a female because she's a good role model for the kids. And that's why she got the job. I'm like, but no, really, once I open my mouth, you'll probably hear why I got the job because I can back it up, right? With intelligence, and I can back it up with knowledge of the job of which I do. And it did get to be tiring to constantly have to prove myself. Now, I'm going to tell you that in the majority of situations, at least in my experience, I had a boss who never discriminated. As a matter of fact, he was very encouraging. But it was so many other people that I came into contact with. And we worked with different vendors from all across the world, really, who I was a manager. And constantly I would be meeting these people in person that would come into the facility and just pass me by or ask me, like literally ask me if I could get them a coffee. And that was just, you know, I mean, that was just one of those things. And I'm like, yeah, no.
I get this like anger inside me hearing this.
Ask me to be a secretary. I would always be asked, by the way, to volunteer on boards, you know, and of course, There's a thing like in the corporate world, and I don't know if it's still a thing, but it used to be a thing where if you were on the board, it was a nice asset on your resume. And so people would always ask me to be, well, the president, the vice president. No, they'd say, will you be the secretary? And I'm like, no, I don't take notes. You know what I mean? It came back to that whole like, well, she's female and she's blonde, so she must be the secretary and she'll take the good notes. And I'm like, no, I'm actually really bad at that.
Yeah, it's insane. The assumptions that we make about people and like, oh, you're not being good at taking notes. You're like a bad woman. Because if you're a woman, you know how to make the coffee and take the notes. It's so funny because nobody will ask you to be a secretary anymore, but they'll like ask me to do stuff. And when I break down what it is, it's like secretary. Oh, you should just email the people. You're really good at that. You should just talk to people on the phone. You're really good at that. And I'm like, how would you know I'm good at that? I've never done it. I mean, I would be because I'm good at a lot of things, but it's so crazy. And honestly, I know you were saying earlier about being bitter, and it's like, I'm not bitter. I'm angry. Like, I get so angry, the stuff that people say. And especially, I get mad about myself, but I get mad about other people too. It's the fact that we have to go through this. And sometimes I think to myself, like, how good could I be at my job if I didn't have to worry about my gender all day or be fighting these comments all day? Like, I get really frustrated when people treat it like it's cute that I'm working, like it's an option. Like, oh, it's so cute that you're doing this or doing that.
Yeah.
I'm learning some more technical stuff. I'm training to be a tech's assistant in a studio, which would basically mean that if gear broke, I would know how to fix it. I'm helping him in the sense that if he has a piece of gear, it'll be like, oh, you do this part. Like today we built some XLR cables, and then we built some instrument cables, and he was working on the inside of a piece of gear. So he was like, oh, here, solder these pieces so that when I need to put them back in, like they're ready, stuff like that. And some guy I'd never met before came in and saw that I was soldering and I was building this cable. And he was like, oh, do you have a license to do that? And the technician was like, I don't have a license to do this. Like, what are you talking about? Wow. I'm like, just because I'm doing something you perceive I shouldn't be doing, you're going to like make a comment about it? So weird.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think age has anything to do with it? Was it an older person or was it a younger person? Do you find that you get flack from both younger and maybe all ages?
Yeah, I find that older people have older views, like, or more archaic is such a bad word, but like archaic views of like, this is what a woman should do. I mean, the answer is yes. When I work with people who are older, I do find that they're less open-minded to anybody of any gender identity doing things, which I do understand to some extent because their world was that way and it's just not that way anymore. I don't know. I try to have more patience with people like that.
Yeah. I was going to say then it might be a combination of, is it because you're female or is it because you're young? You know, there's that as well.
Oh, yeah. For me, it's like a double whammy of terrible. It's like, well, you're young and experienced. Yeah. But I do, whenever I'm like doubting myself, and if there's anyone out there who's listening to this and is like doubting themselves, I always ask, like, would the same question be asked or be appropriate to be asked to a male coworker? And that always answers my question.
Now, you know, it's so interesting because here we are doing a podcast and we're talking about our experiences about being in a male-dominated field and what has happened to us. And yet I feel like I have to explain to the audience right now that I'm not bitter. I really don't feel bitter. I mean, there are things that I feel are maybe not just. And I feel like I've lived my life long enough to understand that, okay, there are things that are not just in this world. And I have to kind of suck it up, buttercup, and deal with it. I will say, and I don't want to apologize or say to the bosses out there that I'm sorry for this conversation or feel like I need to tread lightly. But I will say that some of the positives that have come out of, I guess, maybe not being treated as fair as we would like, is that I worked harder. And because I worked harder, I got better. And I'm proud of that. I don't feel like maybe I shouldn't have had to work so hard, but I do feel proud of the fact that I am capable and very competent. at what I do. And I think that that's been a positive that's happened. And I do believe that over the years, I feel that women have been speaking up more. And I feel like that's a good thing because it needs to be something. It needs to be talked about. It just needs to be talked about. And the more we talk about things, and this is in any situation, right? I mean, I just feel that if the conversations are open and they've begun, then we can start to heal and move forward and have progress.
Yeah, I think I agree that, I mean, there have been a lot of things in my life that I've had to work harder than I should have, or something happened and I had to do something that someone else who with a different experience may not have, that has made me the person I am. But I do wish that things were different because I'm sure even without having to work harder, you were very good at your job.
You are too.
I feel like I'm doing what I'm doing and you did what you're doing. And hopefully throughout like your lifetime and my lifetime, we just keep pushing the needle. I do really like talking about it because I like listening to people talk about it. It's so cathartic to not be gaslit into thinking that, oh, maybe it really is just because I'm not good at my job. I'm not capable and I deserve to be passed over for promotions or not being taken seriously or not being asked to be the VP on the committee or whatever it was. Like maybe I am only the secretary and I just don't think that that's true.
Well, yeah. And I think it's such a valid point that you bring up that we question ourselves. And as long as I've been in industries and as long as I've been alive and working hard and feeling like I got great at what I did and becoming a better person and being better at it, I also still question myself and I still like self-sabotage myself once in a while. And I know better. And I think it's something that's very real for, I think, a lot of women. And I totally get that. I mean, I get it. I understand it. So what do you do, Gillian, to, I don't know, bring yourself out of that? Because it's so easy to talk yourself into that kind of a funk where you're like, oh, you know, maybe I don't deserve this job or maybe these people are better than me.
I don't know what I mean, what do I do? I mean, I haven't stopped doing what I'm doing yet, which is just continuing to show up.
Yeah.
I think because I love what I do, for me, like feeling like I'm not good enough, that makes me want to show up more, which is kind of like what you said, you've worked harder. And really the reason that I don't give up, I really think it's because I do love what I do and because of the people that I've spoken to and knowing that like as hard as I perceive that I have it, it has been harder. And hopefully like I just keep working to hope that like 10 years from now, I'll meet someone who's telling me about their problems and I'll be relieved that they're not the problems that I had. And knowing that like, basically, I mean, I kind of said this earlier, but like whether it's intentional or subconscious or unintentional, the purpose of making things harder for minority groups in a work setting is to push them out. And I'm kind of determined not to be pushed out. And so I guess that's really like the motivating factor is to just be like, you can bully me, but like you can't bully me out of my job because I want to be one day someone who is higher up, who can have a diverse group of people and a diverse group of voices in the room, whether or not the people who are currently in the room want to see that day.
Sure.
So I don't know. What is it for you?
Well, I think talking to people help me, other people that are in similar kind of situations. Like talking to you actually is helpful. And just knowing that you're not like fighting it alone, I think that's number one. And I look to people that I see as examples. I mean, I had a wonderful representative that I worked with a long time ago who was in the middle of transitioning to a woman. And she held a very high like ranking position in the company that I was dealing with. And she was just the bravest soul because it was about 20 years ago, if not longer. And she refused to quit her job. And I know that it could not have been easy for her. And so
I don't think it's easy now.
Yeah. And I don't think it's easy now. But I constantly think, about that. And I just say, you know what? I think if she could do it, if she could have the courage to kind of stick it out and just, stand up for what is right and what is just, because she was excellent at her job and to not be pushed out. And it was a very large company that was that could have had that mentality that a little bit more old school. I'm quite sure 20 years ago, it was not something that people did every day.
No,
It just wasn't. It was a different time then. And I'm thankful that we have people out there today that are defiant and willing to stand up for who they are and willing to fight or defend like what they do in the environment that they do because they're good at it and for no other reason, right? That they are doing what they do and they don't have to necessarily prove to anyone that they can do the job.
It's a big burden that gets put on us to just be doing that. But I had a train of thought and then I lost it because I was into what you were saying. But even like the VO Boss podcast, so many women on this podcast and so many voices that get to be heard, which is like so amazing. I mean, you're still doing the work and all of the stuff. And like when I see women who did it, like my mom did it. She worked on Wall Street in a time that like there weren't many women doing it. And I always want to be like, thank you for your service because it literally is, because it's so difficult to like endure it. And everyone has their different coping mechanisms and everyone does it in a different way. And we were talking about this before we went on air, but like everybody hates women. Like men hate women and women are taught to hate each other. And there's a lot of stuff of like, you're not doing it right or like you're acting a certain way. And it's like we're all just trying to get through it. And the more that we can realize that like we do have each other, we don't need to fight each other. We can actually like be stronger as a group, then that'd be great if we did that more often.
Yeah. I love that sentiment, but you're right. I mean, I feel like sometimes even from women, it's hard because there's so many different preconceived notions about what women should be doing, if they're capable of. I mean, gosh, I feel like we're going backwards in time. I mean, well, that's a whole nother podcast, but politically, I mean, we're talking about rights, human rights, basic human rights. And I love the fact that we are opening a dialogue here. And I'll tell you what, I mean, we could probably do 5 or 6 more podcasts, if not 105. But I do want to say I really appreciate your input. And I'm glad that you were open to discussing this with me because it took courage to do that. And so, yes, I love that. And bosses out there, we'd love to hear from you, love to hear what your thoughts are. And I think if we can all just do what we do best and be confident in that and not have to worry about gender playing any type of a role in it, I think it would just be a better world.
Yeah. And thank you for using this podcast and this platform to talk about this, because clearly without talking about it in the choices, you are talking about it, but it is really good to talk about it. And I'd love to continue the conversation, involve more people, more bosses, more hosts, just to like talk about our experience.
Yes.
Because it makes us feel less alone.
Absolutely.
And bosses, when you're out there working your little butts off, we see you. And if it's hard, you have 2 friends who are cheering for you.
Yes. Oh my God, what a wonderful, beautiful way to end that. Thank you, Gillian, so much. Bosses, I am going to ask you if you have a local nonprofit, if you're wishing that you can do more to help them, you certainly can. Visit 100voiceswhocare.org to learn how. And a big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like bosses. Find out more at ipdtl.com. Guys, have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of VO Boss with your host, Ann Ganguza. And take your business to the next level. Sign up for our mailing list at voboss.com and receive exclusive content, industry revolutionizing tips and strategies, and new ways to rock your business like a boss. Redistribution with permission, coast-to-coast connectivity via IPDTL.